Arteta! What a strike! What a screamer! Zola! And a fantastic goal! Arsenal back in it! And here's Limpar, lines it up, finds the net. Arsenal in front.
UEFA announces the introduction of a third European club competition, leading Stan Kroenke to wonder how little does Arsenal have to spend to qualify for that one. This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name is Elliot Smith, and you can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. We are back. The interlull is the thief of all things good and true in the world, but we are doing a podcast today, and we're going to do it a little differently because we don't have a match to discuss. Having said that, Emery has not lost a match in the last 2 weeks, which is great. Neither has Arsenal. So we're going to have a neutral, the dreaded neutral, on the podcast first to discuss with us where we could possibly make a run at top four, what he makes of Emery so far and Arsenal so far, a little bit on Ramsey and Ozil as well. Then Tim and Clive are down the line. They will give you all the usual waffle that you've heard before, but I invite you to listen to it anyway because we're going to record it. But let's start with that neutral, and that neutral is Mike Goodman. He is the managing editor of StatsBomb, one of the premier analytics companies in the world for football today. He is also one of the co-hosts of the Double Pivot Pod. It is co-hosted by another guy named Mike. I may be talking to that Mike. I'm really not entirely sure which is which, but the Mikes host that, and I definitely recommend listening to it. It is a great full Premier League coverage, actually European football coverage of a podcast, so you definitely want to hear it, the Double Pivot Podcast. And you can follow Mike on Twitter at @the_M_L_G. Okay, that's all out of the way. Now I can introduce him. Hello, Mike.
Hey, how are you?
Great. It's so good to talk to you. I've admired your work from afar, and now a pleasure to speak to you on the podcast. And I think where we want to start is just your overview of the top six races you see it right now. I think it is fair to say that Liverpool and City have distanced themselves. I know it's early in the season, but just based on the quality of those teams, what we can extrapolate from that, let's put them out of reach. If I'm an Arsenal fan wanting to finish in the top four, if I see that as the goal, can you sort of help handicap for me that race vis-a-vis Spurs, Chelsea, and United, and where our opportunity might be to get into that top four?
Sure. I think, the first place you're going to look is at Manchester United because they still, despite looking better in the last couple of weeks, I guess the last month since we're now 2 weeks into an international break, they still have significant questions, and there's still sort of this significant Jose Mourinho possibility that everything just kind of implodes. We're now on the second year in a row where, despite them finishing second in the league last year, they weren't actually that impressive of a team, and it was an amazing year by David De Gea that, at least sort of from the numbers standpoint, kept them way above where we'd expect them to be. So if you're looking for a team that's going to kind of perhaps really come back to the pack hard, they would be a pretty good candidate. They really, despite the points difference, they were not all that much better a team than Arsenal last year. And then I think probably Spurs would be your next best.
We love hearing
bet.
that. We love hearing
Yes.
a little tease of St. Totteringham's Day. Go on. We're ready for this one.
It's just there's a lingering concern that, Harry Kane's stratospheric season from last year may not be repeatable for whatever reason. He was injured during the back half of last season. He was despite still scoring goals, his shooting numbers came way down, and they haven't really bounced back. Whether you want to say that's sort of a recovery from injury issue, whether you want to say it's just being that hot for that long wasn't gonna continue. And if he's not quite what he was, look, there's tons of talent on Spurs, but I think you can make the argument that that team has played very close to the ceiling of its ability for a number of years now. And so all it takes is for a couple of players to have a bad year for whatever reason for their performance to sort of slide and erode.
Would it be fair to say also that given that they are an aggressive pressing team, in fact, maybe the most aggressive now that Liverpool, I think, are a little bit more careful about how they press, that the combination of having a small squad, Champions League competition, and a pressing team, and a lot of players who went deep in the World Cup, that they could be the ones that suffer most from fatigue as the season goes on?
It's certainly possible. those kinds of questions can really, they're hard to game out in advance because so much of it is influenced by injury, and so much of it is influenced by sort of the path of your season. If they draw Manchester City in the second round or the third round of the FA Cup or whatever, and they only have one FA Cup match, well, then fatigue becomes less of an issue, right? If they have a rough beginning to the group stage so that they have to play all of their starters at the back half of the group stage of the Champions League, well, that makes things harder. I think everybody likes to project and sort of predict fatigue early on in the season. I think it's probably a more complicated problem than we give it sort of credit for.
Well, at Arsenal, we're also just used to players getting injured and then being out for 36 months at a time. So maybe it's a little PTSD on our part. One thing that confuses me, a lot of things confuse me. I'm just going to pick one of them. Chelsea's getting a lot of good press right now. We got to see them up close and personal in one game at Stamford Bridge, and they gave up 4 big chances and a half before Emery reverted to his rumored cautiousness, and we basically sat back for the whole second half and didn't really press our advantage. They've beaten some teams that aren't very good. They've escaped some games from what I've seen, and they were extremely open down the flanks against us. So is it fair to say that maybe Chelsea's getting better press than they deserve, or have you been as impressed with them as some of the mainstream media?
Well, I think it's clear that they're not sort of the Maurizio Sarri finished product yet, which is understandable. I mean, as a manager, he came in very, very late this summer. But it's a good thing if you're a team that takes all the points while you're sort of playing yourself into the team you're going to be.
That's fair.
And so that sort of from my prediction and looking forward standpoint, when you start off perfect and I expect you to improve, that's sort of a dangerous combination. So yes, I think probably they're somewhat overrated based on their performances to date, but given that they've taken all the points and I expect those performances to improve, that's sort of a formidable combination.
Are they playing Sarri ball the way you expected them to, or has there been some variation on it?
They're trying to. I think the execution isn't quite there yet. I think you can look at things like Eden Hazard still has this habit of dropping deep to pick up the ball in midfield, and you'd expect the Sarri system to have him staying higher up the pitch. I expect that to kind of come as the season moves along and as they learn to sort of trust their midfield more as they go. I think at the same time, on the other side of the field, either Pedro or Willian, for years, they've been asked to come infield and combine with Hazard and sort of overload one side or the other. Under Sarri, what you expect is for that opposite winger to stay wide and sort of lurk at the opposite fullback as a goal-scoring threat. It's what Callejon did at Napoli for years. And again, you see it work and you see them maintain their position 70-75% of the time. And then you can sort of see these passages of play where the old instincts take over. So I think that Sarri is implementing the system I expect him to implement, but it's taking a little bit of time to get there.
That's fair. I guess I just look at them and I say they've downgraded their keeper. They don't have fullbacks, really. I mean, not really. Not defensively anyway. They do have arguably the best player, potentially the best player in the league in Hazard, but they don't have reliable goal-scoring center forwards. I'll admit I thought Morata would be better, but I think at this point we have to admit he's uneven at best. And if you know anything about me, you know how I rate Giroud. Their midfield looks really, really imposing. But if something's going to derail them, I mean, could it be their vulnerability down the wings and their lack of goal-scoring? I mean, would those be the two areas you would highlight?
I think just their openness. I mean, because their openness is intentional, and it is certainly a high wire act. I think I'm probably higher on Morata than you are. Sort of statistically, he's pretty solid. He had a somewhat of a bad year last year, but his goal scoring numbers weren't great, but his expected goal scoring numbers were fine. So that's the kind of thing you'd expect him to bounce back from. Mm-hmm. And certainly the hierarchy there seems to trust in him. They elected to make him a starter or to keep him as a starter while Michy Batshuayi went to Valencia. Tammy Abraham hasn't really gotten any spin. So the club seems to believe, and Sarri seems to believe, that Morata is fine up front. I think the part of the openness, though, comes from just how lopsided their fullbacks are, right?
Right.
Cesar Azpilicueta is a very good defensive player. but he's not really mobile enough to command a whole wing and be both an attacking contributor and a defender. And, on the other side, Marcus Alonso is a phenomenal attacker, but is certainly vulnerable defensively.
Yeah, we saw that. We exploited that big time in our game, yeah.
Right. And the typical Sarri system is balanced. It expects both fullbacks to contribute in the same way. This Chelsea setup isn't going to be able to do that. So it is an open question as to how they're going to adjust to that.
Yeah, I think that those are all very fair points. It's really hard for me because, I look at this and I see flawed teams, and so I say we can surely get ahead of two of these three flawed teams, except we are also a phenomenally flawed team in our own right. I mean, handicapping it from the outside, if you had to set a percentage chance that Arsenal do make up the ground and get back into the top four, which two do you see us jumping over of those three, and what percentage would you put the likelihood at?
So I think we should be...
Oh, you already said United and Spurs, so I apologize.
United and Spurs. But I think we should be careful when we're talking about percentage chance, that there's a difference between what's the percentage chance of Arsenal finishing fourth and what's the percentage chance that coming down the stretch you're going to feel like you have a sweat, right?
Yeah, good point.
Because, being within 2 points, 3 points of fourth in the last month of the season, I think is incredibly doable. Like, I don't think you're necessarily going to see a rerun of last year where it never felt like the team was in the race to begin with. That said, I think probably, 538 has Arsenal around 34% to make the top four, which is better than United.
I'll take a 1-3 shot. Why not?
Yeah, I think that's probably fairly accurate. That seems sort of instinctively about right to me. But I think that almost more important is this idea of I would expect it to feel like Arsenal is in the race for most of the season, and that's a better place to be than last year.
Great, I'll take it. So let's talk individual players for a minute, and I want to focus on one player just really quickly. It's a player that I have admired from afar, who didn't wind up at Arsenal, and I was disappointed about that, and that's Naby Keita. How impressed have you been with him at Liverpool, but also for Arsenal fans that have been sort of lamenting some of the failures of our midfield over the years, is he the kind of player who was exactly what we were crying out for, maybe something a little different?
He's been wonderful. He's a superstar level player.
How did Liverpool get him? That's sort of, not to denigrate Liverpool, but I mean, it sort of surprised me that there weren't even bigger clubs and bigger fees at play here.
Well, so it was a weird situation, right? They were willing to both pay a lot of money and pay a lot of money a year in advance.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a fairly non-standard way to go about things, and I'm not sure that many other clubs were looking at doing that. So I think everybody kind of ended up winning in terms who was involved in that deal. Both teams and Keita himself. He's playing a slightly different role for Liverpool. He's somewhat more advanced, but excellent. He's so good specifically at bringing the ball from the midfield into the final third, both at his feet and passing. And really, it is a skill that Arsenal have lacked since Santi Cazorla got hurt, which is this one player who can do the full range of things to move the ball forward.
We've been relying on Xhaka to do it with his passing. I mean, I think he's up there for final third entry passes in the Premier League, but he obviously cannot carry the ball and presents huge defensive liabilities and lacks range.
That's right. And Aaron Ramsey does some things off the ball that really facilitate moving it forward. But nobody on Arsenal has the whole package like Keita does. I mean, very few players in the world have the whole package like Keita does, while also contributing defensively. I'm not sure if he was like exactly the fit that maybe Arsenal needed, but when a player is that good, that becomes less important, right? Like Keita is of the level that you just sort of make it work if you can get him, and he's been a great fit at Arsenal, just an absolutely perfect fit for them. At
Liverpool. Yeah, I mean, obviously we're kind of hoping that Torreira can handle some of the defensive responsibilities. I don't think he's going to necessarily carry the ball into the final third the way Keita can, but in his very, very limited cameos for Arsenal so far, I've been really impressed. Have you had a chance to see him at Arsenal? How much did you know about him before? Is he a player we should be really excited for? So,
knew about him as a prospect. and I've watched him play at Arsenal. Watched him play a little bit before he came, but the sort of the profile of him is that he's a very good defensive midfielder and a fine volume passer. He's good at maintaining possession of the ball, but he's not a particularly progressive passer. He's not somebody who has a history of moving the ball forward and up the field. That's not necessarily a problem. You can fit that into systems that work. You can envision him being a good sort of complementary pairing for Xhaka in that way.
Let me ask it like this.
Yeah.
Can he magically fix everything wrong with our club? Because that's kind of what we're hoping for. So is that realistic? Just magically fix everything?
I mean, obviously.
Do the radars show that? Yeah? Okay, good.
Yeah, I mean, look, part of the major challenge of Arsenal right now is this is a collection of a lot of good but not necessarily well-rounded pieces. And so putting that jigsaw puzzle together is a challenge. And Torreira, I think, fits that mold. I think it would be a mistake to look at the things that he does and the things that he doesn't do and say, well, if you give him a chance, maybe he'll also magically do the things that he doesn't do. Like, that's not how I would approach it. How I'd approach it is, okay, let's look at what Torreira is really good at, and let's look at how we can sort of build a cohesive unit that takes advantage of his skills and mitigates his weaknesses.
Okay, so let's dive into that then, and transition to Arsenal now, because so I have been really impressed with Torreira in his cameos and actually impressed with some of his progressive passing, some of his final third passing. He set up Lacazette for his winner against Cardiff, which was great. But, presuming that he will be a little more defensively oriented and that those are not the strongest parts of his game, building a well-rounded midfield in Emery's pressing system is something that I think is going to be perpetually challenging. And Emery has opted for Xhaka and Guendouzi from the start. I'm curious to get your take on two things. One, sort of your general sense of why he's done that and whether it makes sense. And then the other, which is really the existential crisis of the moment at Arsenal. Can Ramsey and Ozil play together? Should Ramsey and Ozil play together? Should Ramsey get the kind of extortionate contract Ozil got? I mean, these are all big questions, but I guess first with the Guendouzi-Xhaka pairing, and then how you fit Ramsey and Ozil into this side.
Yeah, so for starters, I'm not really sure why Guendouzi is starting, which is not to say that he shouldn't be.
I will tell you Arsenal loves him, but the Arsenal fans love him, but do we love him because he's new? I mean, he won our player of the month. It always seems to be a new signing who does that. Do we love him because he's new, or do we love him because he's been good?
Well, look, there's a lot of things that he visibly does well, right? He wants to be on the ball. He plays the ball a lot. He's good at dribbling people. He's good at picking passes and playing passes. This, for a 19-year-old, that's not unusual for a midfielder with a lot of potential. That the obvious things, the things that catch your eye, are the things that come first. I'm not sure that he's particularly good defensively at all yet. Despite the fact that he sort of had a lot of counting stats early on, he made a lot of tackles, he made a lot of interceptions. Part of that's because you're playing against Manchester City and Chelsea, who have the ball a ton. Mm-hmm.
And by the way, in the preseason game against Chelsea, he and Xhaka were bypassed badly in the first part of that game, and I think we've still continued to see some of that as the season has started.
Right, and now look, I think it's one thing for that to happen against Chelsea and City. It's another thing if we go 2-3 months into the season and all of a sudden it's happening against Newcastle, right? But I think Guendouzi is more of a mixed bag than an utter success story. Which, again, he's 19. Like, being a mixed bag at 19 is nothing to be ashamed of and is not to take away from his potential to be a really strong player for many years. He does still need to do a bunch of development. So does that mean he shouldn't be starting now? It's an open question. I can understand, instinctively to me, playing Xhaka, who is a good passer, but very limited defensively, with Torreira, who's a very good defensive player and is an okay passer, just seems to make sense as the base of a midfield.
It certainly seems balanced, right? I mean, it
right.
seems to provide balance. I guess you could make an argument that at home against weaker teams, you may not need that defensive shield, but, doing it against Manchester City and Chelsea, that seems a little odd.
That's my instinct. Now I think you could see that pairing get some run and then understand that, hey, maybe it doesn't work for whatever reasons. But I'm surprised that we haven't seen the two of them play together more. And then the question becomes, what do you do around them?
It sure does. So please fix it. I mean, Ramsey and Ozil are arguably two of the most important pieces at the club right now, because Ozil is on a contract the likes of which even Real Madrid doesn't frequently hand out, and Ramsey is trying to position himself for something similar. So is there a way to make the most of those pieces?
Yes.
Oh, good. That's good news.
But I mean, I
Can you tell
honestly
us?
do think that what Arsenal should be doing is looking to win games, 3-2, 4-1, wide open matches.
Well, that's literally what we've done the last two games, so we're doing it right, I guess.
Yeah, well, on the other hand, you would hope that wouldn't be the case against Cardiff, right?
Hey, we'll take what we can get, man.
Right. But look, I mean, Ozil, I know that there's lots of Ozil detractors. He is a phenomenal passer, both moving the ball up the field and in the final third. He does stuff, on par with anybody in the world. He's not a defensive presence, and the question is, how do you sort of carry that lack of defensive presence? And the easiest answer is in front of a sort of a defensively strong pairing in midfield, or at least a defensively competent pairing in midfield, than with two wingers around him, which, of course, doesn't really leave room for Ramsey. Ramsey can play on the outside, but it's not his strength, right? Ramsey's excellent at moving without the ball from midfield forward and creating havoc, both for himself and for his teammates. But that's sort of destabilizing, right? It sort of means that where he's moving from is wide open, and he's not particularly concerned with making sure he's balanced positionally to prevent counterattacks. And so you put him and Ozil and Xhaka on the field at the same time, and boy, you're really running defensive risks. And I don't think there's any way to avoid that. I mean, you can do that against weaker teams sometimes. But collectively, what you have is this collection of parts that you need to pick and choose from on a game-to-game basis. That's a high degree of difficulty for a team to sort of carry through the course of a season. And when it comes to Ramsey's contract, I'm not sure, given his age and given his skill set, that it justifies a mammoth deal.
I mean, you already have to question, right, the money we've handed out to aging players. I mean, the balance of the squad, you have Ozil on a huge contract. We signed Aubameyang, pushing 30, Mkhitaryan swap for Alexis. I mean, this is not a young side by any stretch of the imagination. Koscielny, may be totally done. Petr Cech is still starting in goal. We signed Lichtsteiner at 36 years old, 34, whatever he is. So, I mean, if we sign Ramsey to a mega deal, it's not that he won't necessarily be good, but he will have no resale value at the end of his deal. I mean, do you look at Arsenal right now and worry that if this group doesn't get back in the top four soon, that trying to rebuild it with no resale value for the major pieces could lead to a sort of catastrophic period of mediocrity? Not to get too dark here, but
I mean, I think the current construction of the club right now, sort of age-wise, is a right now construction. Right? That this collection of players is going to be better this year than next year, and better next year than 2 years from now. They're all sort of right at the end of their primes, kind of at the same time. And Ramsey fits that mold, right? He's 27. So you give him a big contract now, you're going to be paying him a lot of money when he's worse than he is right now. And that's really risky. And so, yeah, there's a lot of sort of squad management that Arsenal need to be doing and looking towards doing. Now, what that looks like depends on a lot of things. It depends on what their revenue is, how much they're willing to spend. Can they move some of these players on? Do they have to move them on for transfer fees in order to sort of replenish the side? And I don't want to get carried away. There is young talent here, right? We just talked about Guendouzi.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, Torreira and Guendouzi could be each 50 million pound players, 2-3 years from now, and that makes everything look a little better.
That's right. And for all the ups and downs, Hector Bellerin is young and very talented. There are
and
pieces.
that's it.
Well,
and that's it. Yeah.
I mean, Lacazette is slightly younger. You expect him to have slightly more time than, say, Aubameyang. But yeah, I mean, it's a concern. It's definitely a concern, and I think that this Arsenal needs to be prepared that 2 years from now, the team they're running out there has to look pretty different from what it looks like right now.
So let me ask you this: if you're Emery, and I want to get a quick thought from you, and I want to be respectful of your time, so we won't go on too much longer, but I want to get a quick thought from you on what you make of Emery so far and how he's approached it. But if you're handed a team that has Lacazette and Aubameyang and Mkhitaryan and Ozil and Ramsey, you see where the strength of your side is, and you say, I've got a lot of attacking talent, but I don't necessarily have the right squad construction for the pressing game I'm used to playing, but they're all in their prime, and it's a win-now squad. How dogmatic should he be about adhering to the philosophy, the footballing philosophy he believes in, versus having the flexibility to take the players he's got and construct a win-now team? I mean, what should his approach be, if you were advising him?
So a couple things there. One is that I'm still not entirely sure that his reputation for being dogmatically defensive is right. It is definitely the popular sort of belief about him. But if you look back through his career, it seems to me that he is somewhat adaptable, and that the reputation comes from sort of being necessarily defensive at Sevilla in particular. And clearly he should be adaptable with this squad, and he should lean into this attacking talent.
So you would start Lacazette and Aubameyang together? I mean, that's been another big debate. I
can see arguments for. I mean, I think the argument here is Mkhitaryan or Lacazette fundamentally. And I can see arguments for both, and I think it would depend on the opponent. Mkhitaryan is a very good creative passer in the final third. Lacazette is a very good scorer in the final third, where everybody does all of their scoring anyway. But so I do think it's a little bit of a mix and match scenario. But yeah, I mean, I think Lacazette should get more playing time than he does fundamentally. And I don't think that Emery is unaware of that from watching this team. My concern with Emery is I wonder if he can calibrate sort of a middle path. I think we've seen Arsenal both be very attacking and open under him, and then very closed and conservative. And we haven't seen a tremendous amount in between the two. And I look back over his career, and I think you can look at a lot of his career through that lens, where, he has seasons at Sevilla where they're a very good team, but also they don't win it all on the road. And he just, every away match he approaches incredibly defensively. You look at the same sort of stuff at PSG, where you look at, say, their meltdown against Barcelona, and when he was there, and it was like, well, this team was a swashbuckling attacking team, and then they went out to sort of manage a lead for 90 minutes.
It kind of reminds me of what we did the second half at Chelsea. I mean,
that's right.
That's what scared me, is I saw a little bit of shades of that.
And then, the flip side of that is you can look at when Sevilla beat Liverpool in the finals of the Europa League, and you see a team that came out very conservatively in the first half and then opened it way up in the second half. So I've seen a lot from Emery over the course of his career of being flexible in that he can both play attacking and defensive. What I am concerned about, and what I'm sort of looking forward to watching Arsenal closely about in the coming weeks, is can he modulate between those two extremes, and is he trying to modulate between those two extremes, or does he conceive of his tactics as just flipping a switch between one and the other? Because if that's what it is, if the way he conceives of putting these teams together is flipping that switch, I'm not sure that's going to work. That would concern me. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of what I'm looking at right now with him.
All right. Well, I guess I'll finish with this then. You work for one of the premier football analytics companies in the world, in StatsBomb. If I read the sort of Twitter press release correctly, I think StatsBomb is working with PSG now, which is great, and congratulations to your team for that. Stats DNA is a part of the Arsenal setup, and it is probably difficult to know how much influence they have had over some of the decisions we have made in the transfer market and the contracts we have handed out. We've let a lot of players get into the final year of their deal. We were able to sell someone like Ox, for example, to Liverpool for good money. In other cases, we had to make swap deals or sign contracts like Ozil's, which I think are questionable not because of the talent of the player, but because of the money that we gave him. For a manager that was TBD and wound up being Emery. So what are the challenges for an analytics company, a stats company, in terms of trying to get the attention of the club? Okay, they employ you. They obviously want your feedback, but how hard is it to really affect strategy and implement a cohesive strategy according to the data that you have? And based on what you've seen at Arsenal, do you think Stats DNA has been able to achieve that, or would you suggest that maybe they've struggled?
So yeah, there's a lot there. Look, working inside a club and doing this kind of stuff is difficult. It's difficult for departments that are sort of well accepted within a club, right? Mm-hmm. Like scouting is hard. There are lots of competing interests. Sports teams in any sport, really, they're big organizations with lots of moving parts and lots of input, and being a cohesive, well-run organization is difficult. That's compounded when you're when you're sort of working in analytics, and lots of traditional people in power structures are, I don't know if comfortable is the right word. It's not instinctive to them.
Would you say that bringing in a guy like Sven Mislintat is a hostile move to an analytics company, or someone that maybe was brought in specifically because he is more comfortable with those kinds of data points and working with groups like that?
It's hard to say from the outside, but I think in general, Arsenal has, on the one hand, sort of shown that they're open to these ideas, right? Like Arsene Wenger was very famous for dropping expected goals references.
That was a great day.
Yeah. At the same time, like Arsene Wenger ran that club, and transfers ran through him, contracts ran through him, and so you can have all the input you want from people who I know, at least by reputation, to be very talented people. And if the guy at the top decides, okay, yes, I hear all that, but here's what I'm going to do instead, you can't. You can be as talented as you want in the world. If you're not making the decisions, you're not making decisions. And again, we're talking about a field here where there's tremendous amounts of uncertainty, right?
Right.
Like, lots of good analytics are going to miss on lots of players. Lots of good scouts are going to miss on lots of players. So figuring out what good looks like itself is a difficult task. What I'd say about Arsenal in general is there is clearly a desire to do things intelligently.
Well, that's a relief.
Yeah, well, look, you don't go out and bring in your own bespoke analytics company to work entirely in-house. And Stats DNA was doing very good work sort of in the more sort of general consulting sphere before they were brought in-house. And then, part of being brought in-house means nobody has any idea what you've done since then because it's Arsenal's.
Right, it's completely opaque. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But, translating good work into good
praxis.
Yeah, right. Seeing end product on the field from any kind of good work is a long, tricky, arduous process that can be very, very hard to unpack. So, look, I think that there's lots of things to be concerned about with Arsenal squad right now. We talked about age. It is a tricky talent mix. At the same time, you look at they clearly identified this summer the problems that they had and went out and tried to solve those problems. They didn't necessarily, I especially look at the defensive line, solve them in the ways I would have advocated solving them. But, when I look at bringing in defenders, bringing in a defensive midfielder, going out and getting Aubameyang after Sanchez left, and, a recognition that we need somebody who's very, very good right now to replace what Sanchez does. All of those things are the kinds of things that I look at being familiar with analytics and say, yep, those are the kinds of problems I have identified as well. But it's very hard to, when I then look at it and say, well, okay, maybe they didn't solve them exactly how I would have solved them, it's very hard for me to say from the outside, oh, they did that wrong, as opposed to, oh, yeah, they tried to do that right, but sometimes you got to make the best of a bad sort of situation, and these were the players we could get. So it's hard. It's hard to say anything definitive other than, by reputation, I know the analytics people are quite well thought of, and it's just how does that translate to on the field is just a very tricky process.
No, I'd say that's encouraging. And look, I mean, I don't know that you need a mega computer and a bunch of quants to say sign everyone who used to play for Dortmund, but
right.
the Torreira signing and the Guendouzi signing deserve credit, and certainly, I mean, little bit diamond in the rough type signings there that we like to see. So I think there's reasons to be encouraged. I'm going to put you on the record right now before we say goodbye. Arsenal will finish top 4 or not?
I'm going to say 5th.
Well, shit. We were doing so well. In any event, first of all, you got to go check out the Double Pivot podcast. Mike is one of the co-hosts with another guy named Mike. So it's one of them. Not sure which, but it's one of them. So definitely go there. Definitely follow him on Twitter at @the_M_L_G. I think I got that right. The M_L_G. He is the managing editor at StatsBomb and generally very considerate guy for coming on and taking some of his time to talk to us about the neutral perspective of our Arsenal and the Premier League. Mike, really enjoyed it and hope to talk to you again soon in the future.
Yeah, thanks very much. I had a great time.
Okay, we're going to take a break, tell you about our favorite craft beer delivery service, and then we'll be back with Tim and Clive after this. How would you like a free case of craft beer? That's right, free. A free case of craft beer. Well, that's exactly what you're going to get from beer52.com, and all you have to do is go to beer52.com/vision. That's beer52.com/vision to claim your free case. All you do is pay £2.95 postage, and you're going to get 8 incredible craft beers, Ferment Magazine, and a snack delivered with free next-day shipping. It's a no-brainer. Beer 52 has a 5-star rating on Trustpilot. They are the world's most popular craft beer delivery service. And right now, you are going to get to discover fantastic beers from the winners of the Raise the Bar competition. Beer 52 search for the UK's best new small brewing in partnership with London's Craft Beer Festival. So, you sign up, beer52.com/vision, you get a free case of craft beer. And the beer you're going to get are the likes of Unity's 7% Export Stout, Boxcar's Belgian IPA, and West by 3's Mothership Wit Passion Fruit. What are you waiting for? Get a free case of craft beer. You can cancel anytime. There's no commitment. This is your chance to try it out. It is only for the UK, so those of us who are not in the UK are desperately sad. We have huge FOMO on this one, so we hope you are taking advantage of it if you are in the UK. Beer52.com, the world's leading craft beer discovery service. Just go to beer52.com/vision and claim your free case today. All right, we're back. Enough of that neutral nonsense. We're here with the people that are really partisan. The first one is Clive. You can find him on Twitter at ClivePAFC. Hello, Clive.
Hello, hello.
And Tim, you can find him on Twitter at Stilberto. Hello, Tim.
Hello there.
Need to do 2 things. First of all, we need to talk to Tim. Maybe an intervention. Tim, I think it's fair to say that your brand is that you never miss an Arsenal game. And it comes to my attention that you will not be at Newcastle this weekend.
Yeah.
This is a monumental occasion. Do you have anything to say? Do you want to get an apology on record at this point?
Yeah. It feels a bit weird. So I'm going to miss my first. Well, we're talking domestically. I haven't done every European away game in this time, but my first domestic game missed since the 20th of January 2002, because 2 of my best friends are getting married.
Okay. So I mean, just I don't know all of the sort of rules of propriety, and I'm not really up on all of this when it comes to English football. But can we officially call you a plastic or not yet? Too soon?
Well, in a couple of years, all of the games will be played in like Hong Kong and New York anyway. So. Probably best to get it out of the way now.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I won't go to those either. Okay, so let's do this. The first thing I want to do is just set the table. We've obviously spoken to Mike already and gotten the neutral perspective. I'm not sure why anybody wants it, but I thought it was well delivered. I want to get your take after the first month on what you've made of Emery so far. So let's start with this, Clive. I want you to pick one thing that Emery has done so far that has really surprised you, that you weren't expecting going into the season?
Surprised me. You know what? I didn't expect him to be so focused on playing out from the back. I didn't see that coming. I thought he would come in and play a formation that suits the players. People were saying 4-2-3-1. I was thinking maybe 4-3-3. Okay, 50-50. He seems to be settling on 4-2-3-1 or a version of 4-2-2, right? So we don't know yet, right? But I didn't expect him to be so goalkeeper focused. I didn't think after a few weeks we'd all be wondering about Peter Cech and his play and how he's had to change his game at 36. I just didn't see that coming. So that, for me, would be the number one thing from a football side has been the surprise.
Okay, yeah, I think that's fair, which also leads to another one you could add, which is if he was going to be that focused, you sure as hell wouldn't have bet on him sticking with Cech rather than Leno. So I think those two go hand in hand. Tim, for you, what has surprised you? Something you just did not see coming?
I would have said the goalkeeper. I think if you spend that much money on a goalkeeper who's very experienced and come with some pedigree, it's a little bit of a surprise. You know, he's not a kid. So I was really surprised by that. I'm not sure anything's hugely surprised. I don't think anything's hugely surpided me.
That's because you have incredible prescience, obviously.
Because everything surprised me, because I didn't really know that much about Emery. I don't watch La Liga, so I had no idea what his Sevilla team was like. I didn't really watch PSG much, so I didn't really know what his PSG team was like. And even if I had, I'm not sure that you get a manager's personality with that PSG team because of the very unique circumstances, both in terms of how much stronger they are than everyone. You know, it's like trying to build up an impression of Celtic's manager. It's useless really, and he had the politics there, which were incredibly unique. So even if I was a studied a student of Paris Saint-Germain, I don't think I'd have built up a great idea of him there anyway. So I think pretty much everything surprised me, except he obviously referenced pretty much from the off that he wanted the team to work harder, he wanted them to run more, he wanted them to press a bit more, and that's happened a bit more, not loads. We haven't turned into Klopp's Liverpool or Pochettino's Spurs overnight, and I didn't think we were going to, but I don't think it's a really what I'd call a rabid high press. It's a bit more than perhaps what we used to do, but so that was one thing I was looking for. As for the rest of it, I really didn't have a clue, to be honest, and that's been reflected in, we've discussed the starting 11s. There always seems to be a surprise because he doesn't really know his players yet, and we don't know him. So it may be a bit of a cop-out of an answer, but nearly everything surprised me.
Well, then let me give you a follow-up just real quick, and you can answer this with one word. So far, which one do you stand by more, the Emery Podcast 1 or the Emery Podcast 2? or you're not on them? If you remember when we did the Emery introduction podcast, we had the initial reaction that went over like a lead balloon, and then, then we did our apology. Yeah. So do you stand by the second one still? So I'm somewhere in between. To be honest, and obviously the jury's still out. The jury's still out, and all of that. And I'm not saying I'm not giving the guy a chance and blah blah blah. To be honest, I think he's probably not an elite manager in the sense that, well, obviously not Guardiola. I think Guardiola is a level above pretty much everybody, but I'm not sure he's in that absolute elite bracket, but that's kind of where Arsenal are at the moment, and I'm still kind of sticking by my initial impression that Emery, if things go to plan, Emery might be a stepping stone, i.e. get us back in the Champions League by hook or by crook, and then we go, and then perhaps we look for. I think if we'd finished fourth last season, I think they'd have gone with Arteta. I really do, but I think they kind of chickened out of it at the last minute because they thought, no, do you know what? We need a bit more of a sure thing. We need to get back in the top four. I think if we'd finished in the top four last season, we might have gone a bit harder for a younger coach like a Nagelsmann, like an Arteta, but they needed a slightly safer pair of hands. So I still get the impression that Emery may be a bit of a transition manager, which is no bad thing.
But yeah, I hope I'm wrong, but this isn't a criticism anyway. But I get the impression that we're in a bit of a place where we don't want to be at the moment, and his job is to get us out. And after that, it might be a case of thanks very much. Not quite a Bruce Rioch, but something not far away.
We did an entire podcast to walk back from this kind of reaction, Tim. You're walking us right back into it, man. He's still Berto on Twitter. Come on back in, Clive. Save us. Help us.
Well, I think obviously we know a little bit more than we did when he was appointed about the state of the club, right? So, and the state of change in the club, and the amount of people that have changed in the backroom staff. Almost everything has changed. So you've gone from a culture where we were called a creche, where there was something called certainty of every single person you saw in the corridors had been there 10 plus years almost. That's what it felt like. Everyone had been there like lifers. Now you have a lack of certainty because all the people have changed. So all the people that do the key jobs in the back room that make the environment feel comfortable, they've gone, right? So, and I think to then put a young manager that's got minimal experience into that environment, into that changing environment, would have been suicidal. We need a very strong, dominant character that's completely sure of himself, that people will follow. And you only follow people with really strong experience or really strong characters. And I think Emery's got that. I think he's a perfect manager for this phase of Arsenal. And I do think he is every manager from now on will be a stepping stone. I don't think we have to get our brains wrapped around that. Every manager will be a 3 to 4 year stepping stone, because that's the way it rolls now. You can only survive in this level of job for 3 years. You take a year off and you come back in again. If he goes to 4, that means he's done really well, right? So, and we got to get comfortable with that and get used to it. So I think he's perfect for what we need right now in the changing Arsenal. It's too early to judge the football side, but I'm quite pleased with the strength of character that he's showing to manage this change. And by the way, do you remember that team we were talking about with the backroom staff, with Mislintat and Ivan and
Raul, yeah.
And Raul, and we were all talking about, it's a team of people. Well, all of a sudden, I can't hear anything from anybody else. Gazidis has gone quiet for his own reasons, and it's all about the manager again. And I think that disappoints me slightly, that I haven't seen or heard more from some of those people and created a bit more people depth, which you often hear me speak about at Arsenal. So it's gone very quiet, and now we're talking about the coach, the players, how they train, and what they're doing. And I was hopeful for a little bit more depth within the club.
I agree. I would just say, to be fair, once the season starts, the focus and the attention is on the football and what's happening on the pitch, and I just don't know how much a Raul or a Sven or an Ivan, and obviously Ivan's a unique situation for reasons we're all aware of, would influence what's happening right now. I think for me, the biggest surprise with Emery, if I had to pick one, which I'm going to because I'm giving myself the chance, is the slowness with which he's integrated Lucas Torreira. I don't totally understand it. I mean, it could have been to ease him back after the World Cup and that he didn't have a full preseason, but seeing the balance we've had when he's in there, and I'm not saying he's the finished article, and I'm not saying it's been perfect, but I'm somewhat surprised that Guendouzi or Xhaka didn't step aside to let Torreira come in and start games. So, we'll see if that changes. Obviously, he's picking lineups right now by the seat of his pants a little bit because he's still trying to learn from his team, and the team is still trying to learn from him. Let's do this. Let's get back to positives for a second. And Clive, what is something that has changed under Emery, or that we're doing under Emery, that you feel is significantly different from what we were doing under Arsene, and that you've really enjoyed seeing?
Well, the running, I like hard-working teams. That's one thing. I'm not overly obsessed to say that we are this pressing team, much like Tim alluded to earlier. I just think we're working harder for longer periods, and I think that makes us a little bit more competitive. Even in the games that we lost, I felt there was a competitive edge to us, and that pleased me a little bit. We had some patches where we just weren't quite organised. That's because we were trying to implement new systems, a new way of playing, where the back line was being held, and we were developing new partnerships. So I can understand that. But even during games, we were fixing problems with halftime substitutions. So I quite like the fact that substitutions seem decisive at different times. I like the fact that we're working harder, developing new relationships. Yeah, I'm positive to a point. I have got my own views on the game and the system I'd like to see, and so there's a little bit of me that says, "Come on, Clive, be patient. That's the way to be. You've got to give a guy a chance." And then a little bit of me saying, "Well, hold on a minute here. We've got some key jewels out here. Why like Torreira, like the two strikers? We've got some decisions to make in midfield. Come on, how much time are you going to take?" And I'm not sure because I don't know the guy. I don't know his routine. I don't know his level of forgiveness for certain things. We know that, with Wenger, he basically forgave everybody all of the time
until he didn't, like Szczesny.
Yeah, until he did it, and then they were gone. And so we're just not sure of his tolerance levels. And so much like the players at the moment, with all new people around them, there's a level of uncertainty within the fans. So I'm not going to leap in a direction, but I'm on the edge. All
right, well, we'll try to get you off that edge in the coming weeks. Another 4-4 at Newcastle might do it. I mean, Tim, would you agree? I mean, is there something that stood out for you that is very different from the Arsene Wenger experience that you prefer, that you like?
Yeah, just building on that, I quite like the way that I think politically that he's managing this team. So I talked a little bit about him potentially being a transition manager, and Clive talked about the change behind the scenes, and that's all kind of happened. There's going to be a lot of change on the pitch as well. And personally, I've been writing about this since about June. Some big heads are going to roll because we have a lot of players in that attack, and we can't play them all at the same time. And it's all very well saying squad depth's nice to have, but a lot of those players aren't going to want to sit on the bench at a club like Arsenal, because most of them will say, I could at least move to the same level of club and get game time. And that's before you take in the whole kind of balance argument. How do we balance all of these players? Because that's not easy either. There are going to be some big heads that are going to roll in that team yet, and some supporters' feelings are going to get hurt because lots of people have really, really invested in individuals over the years. So what I've quite liked is almost a two-pronged approach from Emery. On one hand, yep, he's very quick to make a change, to make a substitution. I feel like in some respects he's giving some players enough rope to hang themselves with. Maybe he's doing that with Czech. And I've kind of rethought the Czech situation over the last kind of couple of days, because at first I was a bit flabbergasted by it. I thought, why are you buying a 26-year-old goalkeeper with 300 appearances and Germany caps, to ease him in? But I think Paul might have said this on the last podcast. The thing is, once you drop Czech, that's it. Like, he's 36. Once you drop him, you drop him. And Spurs did this. From the
squad, then, isn't he? He's dead.
Yeah, that's it. And Spurs did this when they bought when they bought Hugo Lloris. They had Brad Friedel, who was about 36, 37, and they kept Friedel in for about 3/4 of a season because, I think for the same reason. Because if you put if you put Leno straight in and he doesn't quite do it, and then he gets dropped for Czech, you perhaps have a bit of a situation on your hands there. Whereas you put Czech in, you keep him there until it becomes absolutely obvious he can't play anymore, and then put Leno in. And actually, I've kind of rethought it and think that's fine.
And then it feels like Leno's job too, right? Like he's not looking over his shoulder at that point, because Czech got his chance, lost a chance, and Leno knows it's his now.
Exactly. And so I think it's been quite an interesting two-pronged approach in that, on one hand, he's given players enough rope to hang themselves with. Ozil as well. He had a disagreement on the training ground with Ozil. That is 100% true, by the way. That did happen. But I don't think that's a massive deal in and of itself. He sat Ramsey down for the Chelsea game, and before that Chelsea game he said, I think Ramsey needs to focus on playing and forget about the contracts. He's not butted heads, I think that's overstating it, but he's not been a respecter of reputation. He's been willing to make those calls, but at the same time he hasn't been he hasn't been needlessly confrontational. Ozil came straight back in against Cardiff. Ramsey came straight back in against West Ham. He's hooked players at half-time who've then started the next game. It feels like, and I think this was absolutely necessary, pretty much every player has a blank slate to a degree, but also Emery's making it very clear, this is how we're going to play, and you either fit in or that's it. I'm not afraid to hook you. I'm not afraid to leave you out. And so I think that's a very, very delicate, very, very difficult situation to handle, and particularly when you've just spent a year managing Neymar at PSG, which is quite must have been a traumatic experience for him. And so for him to kind of manage this in quite a balanced way in terms of not ceding to the egos, but at the same time not just falling out with them for no reason. I think he's handled that quite well. I quite like the way he's gone about that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say the one thing with the Czech Leno thing we also have to remember too is, this is what happens when you have a coach who is not the manager, who is not picking the transfer targets and making the transfers. And I'm not suggesting that he didn't want Leno, but that's not his signing specifically. So, it is interesting when you inherit a team of players that aren't the players you chose, you're going to respond to them very differently than when you're your players. Think about this. Every single player at the club last season was someone Arsene Wenger selected, agreed to, bought, signed, right? So those are his players, and he's going to have strong feelings about all of them. Emery comes in. There's not a single player at that club he cares about. I mean, he may like them, he may think they're talented, but he has no association or connection with them beyond the fact that they're at the club he now coaches. So he can approach them with a total blank slate. And that gives him a lot of freedom that, some of the baggage Arsene probably had with some of those players prevented him from maybe making those same kind of decisions. And it has been enjoyable, I think, to see a manager react to the game a little quicker. I think Arsene Wenger had his reasons for making his substitutions when he did and in the manner that he did, and I certainly think you can justify them. But I do like that we've seen, a halftime switch, that we've seen changes early in the game. Go ahead, Tim. Yeah.
And also, just quickly, one of the first things he did, Wilshere. You talk about a manager being a bit too close, maybe not being objective about a player. Let's have it right. Wilshere has been really average, if I'm being kind, for quite a while now, and really the Arsenal story should have ended for him a few years ago, and yet there was still a contract on the table, and I don't think that was based on football reasons. Emery came in. Actually, I think that was probably a bit of an open goal for Emery, because he probably looked at it and thought, yeah, this guy's not that good anymore. And, that old managerial trick of I'm going to fire someone in front of everyone so I have the authority. Yeah. Wilshere was maybe a bit of an open goal. It's like, right, he's not actually that good anymore, but he's a big figure at the club. I'm going to swing the axe, clean break. There we go. I'm the boss.
And it's easy to swing the axe when there's actually no contract. The guy's out of contract in the summer, right? I mean,
even better.
Yeah, you don't have to go negotiate a fee or get him to agree to go somewhere. He's literally not under contract anymore. So yeah, that's actually well said. So let's we just did positives. Let's swing back the other direction for a moment. Clive, what's a moment in the season or a decision in the season or something he's done so far? And I realize it's still early, but that kind of had you pulling your hair out. Maybe you're saying, nah, you may have gotten it wrong there.
Mm-hmm.
Just one, please. Just the one.
Yeah, I'll give you the. I don't like the. I don't like the Lacazette on the left thing. If I'm sorry, Aubameyang on the left. I don't like that. It's time to stop that now. I think we're just not maximising our players, and so I know he wants to play to a shape, but I can't see the benefit of keeping him 10 yards further left. Bring him 10 yards in and the whole team looks different. And so change. Simple as that. It's obvious it's in front of you. I think I don't want to get annoyed yet after 4 games and 2 against the top 6 from last season. I don't want to hold on to it too much. I think the goalkeeper thing I get. I was watching Albania last night versus Scotland, and even they're using their goalkeeper. There seems to be a massive trend with trying to create overloads higher up the pitch by drawing people onto you. And so I didn't see that coming from a football perspective, I don't think just Arsenal are trying to do this. Everybody's doing it.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that maybe we're going to get better at to go through the season. So yeah, I'm over that. The centre halves, I'm cool with that. It's been okay. I would just like to see us maximize our two forwards, because I think there's a level higher we can go if we start outscoring teams. And just to go on from what you talk about on the people side of things, maybe this is what we have right now at Arsenal. We expected a super coach, and we were told that we had a manager coming in who struggled with the dressing room at PSG. When you struggle somewhere, the first thing you do is you try to learn that lesson. And maybe we've got a really strong people manager that's really taking the comfort away from the dressing room, and he's managing the people. And again, I think he's got the character and the firmness and the assurance to actually do that.
Let's dig into that, because I think that's a really interesting point. And by the way, you're living your best life watching Albania Scotland on a Monday night or whatever. And good for you, man. Good for you. You think Arsene Wenger never misses a game. Tim, so to Clive's point about learning the lesson and coming in and being a strong people manager, Santi Cazorla gave a really interesting and open and wide-reaching interview recently. Talked about some of the struggles he had with injury at Arsenal, and I thought actually went a little easy on the club given some of the things he recounts. But he also says that he spoke to Emery before he took the job, told him about Arsenal, told him what the problems were, the things he had to change, and that it was going to take time to change those things. I'm curious, and I know you have absolutely no way of knowing this. This is pure fan fiction now. Write the book the way you want. What would you guess were those things? Because he was asked, and he said, no, I'm not going to tell you. That's for secret. That's private. But what do you think those things were that Cazorla might have said, this is what you have to change at Arsenal?
I'd be staggered if the word or the Spanish translation of the phrase comfort zone didn't come into it. And I think the whole club got into a comfort zone, which is quite weird because Arsenal looked like quite an uncomfortable environment, certainly in terms of the external pressure. But I wouldn't be surprised if he said, this player, comfort zone, this player, comfort zone, this player needs to kick up the arse. Arsene, with maybe some elements of the club, got into a comfort zone, had a lot at his fingertips that perhaps he wasn't using in the way he could have been using. So I think that would be the main thing to come out. I also think, we've heard whispers, haven't we, about the players were really, really, they were really kind of craving some level, a greater level of instruction, particularly when it comes to the opposition. And I think, Emery is kind of famous for that, isn't he? That
Bellerin's come close to just coming out and saying this basically recently.
Yeah, precisely. I think there's probably a lot of them that are kind of, so there are some players that have probably slipped into a comfort zone, and there are some players who don't want to slip into a comfort zone and are kind of saying, look, I need to be pushed here. Both I need to be pushed, but also I need some of the stress taken off of me. I need a little bit more instruction. Football's becoming a bit more chess-like at the elite level. So I wouldn't be surprised if those things featured. As for the technical side, who knows what he might have said about, I don't know, data, player performance, fitness management. I think those things we just really, really don't have any insight on. But yeah, when I say comfort zone, I think definitely culturally, but I think individually, he'll have probably seen some players and thought, yeah, you're not putting it in.
Yeah, and by the way, I think one thing we should bear in mind, because I think maybe there was some of that with Mesut Ozil, but there's something people forget. Mesut Ozil wrote a book, and he talked about Jose Mourinho in the book, and we all hate Jose Mourinho. But he tells anecdotes about how Mourinho would single him out, push him, criticize him in front of the team, and how it was hard for him at the time, but it got the best out of him. He seemed very self-aware of the fact that he needed that and that he thrived under that. So, we all get worried, training ground bust up. Oh no, our poor flower Mesut Ozil. But Mesut Ozil himself has said that some of his best football at Real Madrid came under Jose Mourinho, who was very critical of him and pushed him. So, I don't think we have to worry about our little delicate flower. I think we have to worry about getting the best out of him. And maybe that is what Emery is endeavoring to do now. So let's not be so scared. I mean, at the end of the day, the guy's making a lot of money. He's not going anywhere. So let's push him. Let's see what we can get. Go ahead, Tim. Yeah.
And a bit of tension and that's probably one of the things that's, again, we're guessing, evaporated into this comfort zone. You need a bit of tension. You don't want it to boil over. And I think maybe at the end of the Invincibles, it started to boil over a bit, and you got some cliques developing and some things, some kind of disagreements, and it maybe got a little bit toxic a little bit quickly because they're all so competitive. But you need that tension in there as well. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if Emery, talking about what you said, Elliot, there about Jose Mourinho, I wouldn't be surprised if Emery did pick on Ozil a bit in training and thought, playing the long game, just thinking, I'm going to push you. I'm going to push you. I'm going to push you in front of everyone, and you're not going to like it, but maybe in 3 months' time you'll thank me for it.
Yeah, I absolutely see that. Yeah, go ahead, Clive.
Yeah, it's a management style thing, isn't it? It's just that's all this is, right? And you get managers that come in and want to make people feel comfortable because they feel they get the best out of them in a relaxed environment. And then it's almost cyclical, it's like being at work, right? You get a strong manager come in and you're begging for a softer manager to come in to allow you to be more creative. Then you think, actually, the softer guy is making me get away too much. Maybe I need a little bit more instruction. It's just cyclical management styles, right? And some styles work for people, but I think what we've got to get used to at elite environments is that change should happen quicker. And you often hear me talking about renewal. If you look at any sort of high performance team model, renewal happens at a certain period. And what we didn't do at Arsenal, we did not renew the people. We didn't renew the people. And so when you get that many people stay at a club for that long, they want an environment that they like, and they want to stay with people that they like. And what they can't see are the measures of how you judge your success criteria are falling, and the standards are not rising because you're not renewing the people, you're not renewing the new ideas, you're not developing the club based on new information. And I think that's what happened at Arsenal. We just became a little bit stale and comfortable. And so this guy's come in, but he hasn't come in on his own. There's mobs of people coming with him. And I think that whole change is going to take many months to really solidify until people understand what good looks like. What good looks like. When they understand that, I'm talking about on your everyday behaviors, how you behave, how you work, how you train, how you do everything, how you move, your attitude, how you spend your days off. Once people understand the new success criteria and everyone gets it, I think then we'll see a collective step up in standards, and then we'll move into the next phase, which is January, which I think is going to be the most interesting transfer window in Arsenal's recent history.
Absolutely, and I want to get into our top four race now, and just sort of a month into the season, updating our view on the top four race. But we have to take a break to do something really important first, and that is laugh at Jose Mourinho tripping over a rope. Oh, man, that was great. That was great. If you haven't seen it, Jose Mourinho tripped over a rope, and it was brilliant. Okay, now that that's out of the way, Tim, let's handicap the top four race for a minute. So I think, can we all agree we're going to put Liverpool and City out of reach?
Over the hills and far away.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, because I don't think we need to get into that. So I talked about this with Mike a bit, but I want to get you guys to give me your thoughts on it. United, Chelsea, Spurs. If we're going to overhaul two of them, Tim, who would they be and why?
So I think Spurs are gettable. The reason Spurs are gettable is I don't think they've got a very big squad. They played Watford last week and they didn't make a substitution until they were 2-1 down with about 12 minutes to go. And then when you look on their bench, it's because they had three fullbacks, a goalkeeper, a centre-half, a midfielder and Llorente. That's not a particularly deep squad. And I know we've been saying this for a couple of seasons now, but that has to catch up with them at some point. That really has to catch up with them.
It's a shame they weren't allowed to sign anybody in the window.
And this is what the problem they've got really in terms of trying to evolve their squad. they've got such a set first 11, and in one respect they had a brilliant window because they kept it together again, and I don't understand how they keep doing it. I don't understand how they keep having these seasons with these individuals and nobody seems to be flashing any money at them to buy them. I can't wrap my head around it. To be honest with you, I can't wrap my head around why nobody is banging on their door for Harry Kane.
The money's too big, Tim. That's why the prices are ridiculous.
I'm going to jump in and interrupt you both. I think that out there in the analytics community, in the know community, the sense I get is that there is legitimate concern about the ankle injury he suffered and the reduction in his shots subsequently, and I think it may have scared some clubs away. But that, again, I'm just totally projecting there, but I think there's a possibility that the big clubs took a pause this summer on Harry Kane and said, he's coming off an ankle injury. His shots have dropped dramatically, and he's coming off a summer where he didn't have a break. And they may have said, "We need to see him do it again for another season."
Yeah, that's a fair point. But yeah, the problem they've got is they've got a really quite set first 11, and it's difficult for them, particularly at this time with the stadium, to buy players that improve on that, because to buy players that improve on that costs the kind of money that they probably don't really have. So anyway, and listen, they're still a really good team. They're still really well drilled. They've been together for a few years. I don't think hunger will be an issue. I don't think Pochettino will allow that. And I think one of the reasons they've stayed together is they're happy playing together. So while I think they're vulnerable, I don't think it's going to be easy by any means, but they're there. They're there to be got as far as I'm concerned.
Who's the other one?
I still think Chelsea, and the reason Man U are obviously vulnerable as well, but I think Man United will be maybe a fairly comfortable third. I think people are overdoing this 3-season thing in their heads about Jose Mourinho, and that they think because it's his third season, it will absolutely follow the pattern because it's a pattern, and that's the end of it. And
we are pattern-seeking machines.
But the thing is, the pattern doesn't hold anyway, because the whole Jose Mourinho pattern is on the premise that his first and second seasons are any good, which they haven't been at Man U. Man U won a Europa League and a League Cup since he's been there. For United, that's nothing. That's like 5p on the floor. Do you think like Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Barcelona, you think they'd be happy with a Europa League and a League Cup in 3 years? Absolutely not.
They'd have sacked 4 managers.
Exactly. So for me, Man United are just going to do what they've done in each season under Mourinho, be really boring, really underwhelming, but they'll do plenty enough to stay in the top 4, because that's what, I know they finished 6th in his first season and won the Europa League, but I think they'll do loosely the same thing, and that this 3-season arc hasn't happened at Man U because he hasn't had the good first and second season. So I don't get me wrong, I do think perhaps they're there to be got at, but I'd still think they've got enough individual quality to overcome that. Even though they've started well, I still think Chelsea, and again, not easy by any means. We know they've won their first 4 games. I'm still not sure how convincing they've been. Maybe you could flip that and say, well, they've not been that convincing and they've won 4 games. I still think that they're relying on individuals quite a lot. Particularly Hazard, and listen, Hazard's probably good enough.
Yeah, if you're going to rely on an individual, it's a good one.
Yeah, exactly. He's probably good enough to take that burden. But I think the thing is with Chelsea, they're only ever a defeat or 2 away from you can start to pull a thread when that happens to them. They're still they're a high functioning but dysfunctional club. And I seem to remember they started last season fairly well, and then they lost at Palace, and then they kind of went not quite into free fall. They went as into free fall as a club of that level goes, and I want to see their chin tested, is what I'm saying. I want to see the first. We
had the chance to do it if we had gone toe to toe with them in the second half of that game, which is so frustrating. But
and that for me is the disappointment of the season so far for us, that second half at Stamford Bridge. So I think I think fourth will be a three-way fight between the three London clubs. I think United will be just about on a little island on their own in third.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, and that raises the point, if I had to pick my Emery disappointment of the season, you're spot on. Calling off the Dogs at Stamford Bridge really annoyed me because there was no need to do it. But anyway, Clive, for you, who are the two that you could see us overhauling and get into the top four, and why?
Spurs for me as well. I think Spurs are going to struggle fatigue-wise, and I think they're going to struggle fame-wise. I think they've become England's team, from a young English player perspective.
So extra scrutiny, you're saying, extra focus, yeah.
Yeah, and people look at them. People look at those players and they want their shirts, right? So when teams are playing against them, they're quite famous young men now, and I think they're going to be challenged in a slightly different way. And I don't see them having the creativity and the guile to be able to overcome some of these teams who can run with them and who are as big as them. And Watford showed exactly how to do it when they matched their running power and then matched them with desire and got them to play in areas where they didn't want to be. They had nowhere to go, and it wasn't unlucky, that defeat. There was no ooze at the end, right? So I think Spurs are going to struggle. I think another reason why they've kept that team together is the new stadium. Everyone wants to be in the new stadium, and they've waited for that new stadium. And many of those players are going to be disappointed, and they're going to be challenged next summer. I don't know if you've noticed, the contract signings have slowed down a little bit. There isn't a new contract being signed every month like there was previously. So there are a few players that are holding out a little bit longer. So I think in the next 12 months, we're going to see a distinct change to that squad. What they do have is squad value. They do have the ability to replenish, and they seem to be doing very well on recruitment. And they now have a brighter looking, shiny club to attract people. And they have Champions League football. So that does hurt a little bit. But I think in the end, their squad depth is going to cost them, and I see them dropping out. I do see United as the other. I think what United don't have compared to Chelsea is a defined pattern of play. We can all name the Chelsea team within one or two players, and we sort of know where they stand. We know what they do. We know their system. And we can see a pattern developing, and that's only going to get better. He's done that very quickly. He's brought in a spinal midfielder. He's got his individuals in the dual 10 position, and he's got his structural number 9, and he's got his run around 8. And you can see it there, and he's only going to improve on that, and the pattern is set. I see that type of team having the ability to accumulate points more easily than I see Manchester United. If I ask you to tell me who's going to play for Manchester United on the left wing, right wing, in centre midfield, what their system's going to be, if they're putting Ander Herrera at right centre half, then we've got a bit of a problem, right? I think the manager is so obsessed with trying to make decisions that are a little bit abstract, so he looks good in the recovery. I think his game has been rumbled. I think people are prepared for his plan A, plan B, plan C, and they are not falling for it anymore. If he parks the bus, people are picking him off. If he comes out of a strange formation, people are ready for him. And I think his tricks have all been played. And I'm looking at his players who also went fine to the World Cup. I don't see any of the problems they had last year being resolved. So I think United could struggle. I think the light is shining on them. The press is waiting for Mourinho to fail. And funny enough, if Arsenal can accumulate points in the background quietly and slowly, I think the light will shine on those other teams and allow us to creep up behind them. So that's how I see it going.
Yeah, I agree with that. Look, I'll tell you something. I think that Jose Mourinho's problem is that he just doesn't have very good defenders. I think he figured out a long time ago that at big clubs, your attacking players are so talented that you can park the bus and rely on them to figure something out, score a wonder goal, pick something off. And, that's good enough. But he doesn't have the defenders to do it anymore. I'll disagree with you on this one thing, Tim. I mean, I've seen Jose Mourinho teams totally throw in the towel on him. We saw it at Chelsea, right? What did they finish? 14th? 12th? Was it 12th? 10th? All right, you know what? It's still terrible.
Yeah.
And, there's trouble brewing with Martial, I think you would say. And Pogba, certainly. I don't think Fred has been very good. I think that midfield, doesn't work unless Pogba is at his best. So
Alexis.
yeah, well, and then the interesting thing about Alexis is he's still a high volume chance creator, but he's no longer a high volume finisher. And so it's all on Lukaku at that point, especially because he doesn't seem to trust Rashford and Martial that much. I don't know. I could see trouble brewing there. For me, I think it's Spurs and United, but Chelsea are right in there. For Chelsea, it would have to come down to something like they just can't get the goals they need, because I don't know that Morata and Giroud are an elite strike force, although Hazard can make up the difference. So we'll see. Let's do this. Let's leave the top 4 race aside and finish the pod with just a really, really quick mini preview of Newcastle. I know you don't care about the game enough to go to it, Tim, and you're going to have your video preview of the game up on Patreon this week, so I don't want to steal too much of that. Just really, really quickly, your expectation, 30,000-foot view.
I expect Newcastle not quite to play quite as conservatively as they have against like Man City last season and Chelsea a couple of weeks ago, but still fairly organised. I think maybe one thing that is perhaps going for Arsenal a little bit at the moment is that our defence is so bad that some of these teams feel like they can have a go at us. And I don't blame them for thinking that, but actually, we're very top heavy. Our attack is very good, and if you give our attack a little bit of room, we can win these kind of knife fights. I'm not sure this one's going to turn into a knife fight, but I do think Newcastle will perhaps be a little bit more encouraged to take us on, being a relative term, than they have been against some of the other bigger teams. So I'm expecting it to be fairly tight and cagey, but I think Arsenal will win. Oh, interesting. Okay, well, that's nice to hear. Clive?
I think what interests me, I know we spoke a little bit about Project 24, right, and this 8-game run, but actually, if I was the management, I would be thinking about the first 4 games international break. Then you got a couple of weeks to sit down and talk. I think this game might tell us a lot about what he's learned, and I think we may see a slight tweaking things, because he must have learned a lot. He rotated, he changed people around, he chinned people, with his people management side of things. He benched people, he hooked people, he didn't start people. He did all of this in 4 games. He kept people in who we didn't expect to be in. We haven't started our midfield superstar we all want to see. And so he has had a good chance to learn in the first 4 games, and he's got 6 points. Now we got a game where he's had a rest, he's had a chance to think, and I wonder if he's going to start implementing the lessons into the next game. That's what I'm looking for. From the Newcastle side of things, I agree, every team's encouraged playing against us. They look at our spaces and they want to come at us. You heard me say that a million times. But I think Newcastle are very vulnerable, and they have their own issues. There was a training ground issue with Lascelles and I can't remember his name, Richie.
Shelby.
Was it Shelby or was it Richie, the little lefty? I can't remember, one of the two. And they've been fighting at the training ground, and so they've got a few issues. Rafa, there's demonstrations going on, and Rafa's in the middle of that as well. The fans love him. I don't sense a happy club at the moment. So I think if we were to do our thing and put them under pressure and watch the crowd turn on them, that could be interesting. But what you must never do, and I've been to Newcastle many times, is never encourage that crowd, because it'll be a long day for you if you do.
It gets so loud there if you give them a reason to get behind the team. So, yeah, I agree. Exactly. I think, unfortunately, maybe a little knock for Torreira playing for Uruguay in the United States in Houston the other day against Mexico. So, we'll have to see how that goes. I would love to see him start if he can. I think it's really, really important, and I would love to see Lacazette and Aubameyang continue together, but we'll see what he thinks. I mean, the one thing we saw against Cardiff is we really did miss Mkhitaryan and Bellerin working that right channel. So, we'll just have to see what happens. I think we can leave it there. We will definitely come back with a post-Newcastle pod. Probably leave Tim off it since he won't have seen the game, but his preview will be up soon. And please, if you would love to sign up for our Patreon, we'd love to have you there. We post ad-free episodes of the main pod. We have Tim's season or match previews. Easy for me to say. That'll be up weekly now, which is great. We're doing our In the Spotlight series where we focus on individual players. We have some special guests lined up and some other special pod episodes, as well as we might be doing some video content as well. Tim's match previews being among them. We should probably stop because it seems like my tongue may be going numb or something. I don't know. In any event, We really appreciate you listening and supporting us. For those who support on Patreon, thank you. Even if you don't, thank you so much for listening. As always, we are so grateful to have you. I speak for everyone, even Paul, who is not here to tell you to go fuck yourselves, which is great. And give us a 5-star review. Write nasty things about Paul in the comments. He deserves it. Scott will be back on a future pod as well. Tim's on Twitter at Stillberto. Thanks, Tim.
My pleasure as always.
Indeed. Clive's on Twitter at ClivePAFC. Thanks, Clive.
Thank you very much.
My name's Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. Give us a 5-star review, as mentioned, and we will talk to you after Arsenal 10, Newcastle 0.